All right, guys. I wanted to do a little bit of a post-mortem on the general election that happened yesterday. I should be ecstatic. I'm a lifelong Labour voter. I campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn, knocked on doors for him. Fantastic manifesto in 2017, 2019. I think most of us know the story with Jeremy Corbyn. Huge amount of popularity amongst people, but stifled severely by a sustained, relentless smear campaign, sabotage from without and from within, his own MPs working against him daily to upend his own chances of getting elected. Despite all of that, he got so close. Um, Keir Starmer has just been elected Prime Minister, and he got 3 million less votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2017, despite all those smears and sabotage. Imagine how well Corbyn might have done if the press had given him a free pass or even endorsed him like they have done for Starmer. I mean, the Sun came out in support for Keir Starmer. Most mainstream papers ended up back in Labour, which should be a red flag in itself, because of course the mainstream media is very right wing, very corporate, very globalist, very controlled. So there isn't really any sort of genuine progressive or left wing radical voices in the mainstream media. So that's one red flag there. But of course, we should know Keir Starmer, his history is clear. You know, this is a man that was in the Trilateral Commission, an unelected globalist influencing organization that is just very anti-democratic, very anti the people, certainly not progressive, certainly not socialist. It's so funny that a lot of detractors are saying, "Oh, we've got a hard left socialist in government in government now." No, you haven't. You really haven't. Keir Starmer is the man that helped to incarcerate Julian Assange when he was head of the CPS. He also basically blocked an investigation into Jimmy Savile, although they'll try and make out like he had nothing to do with the fact that no investigation occurred there. He was head of CPS at that time. This is a man who expelled the former leader of the party, Jeremy Corbyn, expelled a lot of left wing MPs and activists. This is a man who blindly supports Israel against Gaza, you know. He's a man who sank his own party's election chances in 2019 by backing a second referendum campaign that nobody wanted in the north, in the Midlands, and that's why Labour's vote tanked. It was holding steady until they announced at the last minute that they were going to support a second referendum. That was down to Starmer. And everybody was desperate to try and get back in the EU, even though he never really left. That's a whole different discussion. You know, thought that he would be their man to take them back into the EU. But now, of course, now that he's leader, now that he's in government, he's said, we're never going to get back into the EU in my lifetime. So it was obvious he just used that as a tool to depose rather, Jeremy Corbyn. So he's a man of no morals. He's a man who has whipped Labour to support or abstain on many, many heinous Tory bills. So, you know, this has been the most rushed, most short general election that I can remember in my life. There was no reason for the Tories to call it. Well, no apparent reason for the Tories to call it. There was a very good reason, and we'll get to that. But Starmer, whipped Labour to abstain on bills such as one that would have criminalised water companies for polluting sewage. He abstained on the police powers bill that would, or he planned to abstain on until there was a backlash. The police powers bill, which would basically outlaw protests and give police more powers against protesters. He abstained on a bill to that allowed secret agents essentially to break the law in the course of their duties. So absolute immunity for criminal activity for secret agents. Dodgy. And there's a whole raft of different policies like that that he has either supported or abstained on. So no opposition, no, ethical stance on these matters. So for Labour to have ran on this empty, I mean, I haven't seen any debate. I haven't seen any. I know there was the Sunak versus Starmer debate. I haven't seen, compared to previous elections, it's been tumbleweed. And it is my opinion that is because this is a changing of the guard. Nothing happens by accident. All of our major institutions are compromised at this point. The powers that be, that lovely vague term, which refers to basically power and influence, money, power, influence, right? Those that control those systems that control us have it all wrapped up, and nothing that happens by accident. I am more convinced of this than ever since the whole pandemic fiasco, to which Starmer was a fervent supporter. He called for even more draconian lockdowns, even more draconian and authoritarian targeting of people who didn't want the jabs. He wanted to ostracize further and punish further those that refused the jabs, with good bloody reason. And we've been proven right on that, haven't we? Even though there hasn't been an autopsy of that situation. The most egregious violation of civic rights in living memory, the most extreme authoritarian policies such as lockdowns, telling people you couldn't leave your house because death was in the air. No, it wasn't. Anyway, he supported all that. So this guy is dodgy. So why did they call the election? So we have a uni-party in this country. The Tories and the Labour are basically on the same page when it comes to the big picture direction of travel within the world currently, and that is this shift towards a sort of global network of influence and policy making and decision making, cascaded down to the lowly elected officials in the governments of nations. The whole idea of democracy, of course, is we get to elect people that are accountable for their actions and are employed by us to enact policies that we support. But that's not what we have now. What we have now is a bunch of stamp holders who sign off on policies that are decided and dictated by groups that we cannot elect, that aren't up for election. Talking of course, things like the WHO, with its recent focus on a pandemic preparedness treaty, the international health regulations that will seek to impose really draconian mandates and give them the power to basically declare and dictate what qualifies as a public health emergency and how you need to deal with that. So countries no longer would have the right to choose their own response to a supposed health crisis. This would be dictated from unelected bodies that have got it so badly wrong as well, which makes it even more galling over the last several years. They got everything wrong on COVID. Their decisions were almost the opposite of what we should have done. Restricting safe and effective, cheap, readily available medications. Lockdowns, which didn't help at all and in fact exacerbated many problems. Shutting down businesses, which is the economic harry-carry, which is still, don't know how long it's going to take to recover from that, if we ever will. Shutting down health services, which exacerbated a smorgasbord of other health issues. Now the waiting list for the NHS is around 7 million. Before COVID it was 2 million, still bad, but so yeah, the WHO got everything wrong, and yet now they're seeking to mandate that they will be able to dictate future scenarios like that, with even more top-down approach to it. So the WHO, the WEF, of course, the World Economic Forum, which Starmer is a staunch supporter of, and again, an unelected body, which presents itself as just giving advice. But it's actually the cornerstone of a set of ideas or policies that a huge majority of the most powerful people, governments, organizations are behind, usually through bullying, through such a thing as the IMF. So the IMF will punish countries that do not fall in line with what is being planned by, those that are really holding the reins. Starmer is on board with that. He is you could say, is a puppet of these organizations. So isn't really making decisions of his own. He's ex-Trilateral Commission. I think I said that before, but yeah. He's up there with some of the most dodgy motherfuckers we could possibly have elected. I should be celebrating. It's a Labour government, isn't it? We'll see. I got off topic. I wanted to address this point of why the Tories might have called this election now when they had no reason to. They had a majority. They had another year, was it, left in power before they had to have an election, is that right? The last one was 2019, so yeah. Anyway, right. Regardless of that, it was a rushed election. That's the main point. There was no debate. There was no scrutiny of manifestos. There was no discussion, unlike 17 and 19, where Corbyn's excellent manifesto was quite wrongly dragged over the coals and dismantled with ridiculous analysis that made no sense, even though it was fully costed. And the individual policies within those manifestos were supported by a huge percentage of people in the country. If you divorced it from this lead weight that was Jeremy Corbyn for a lot of people who believed the smears about him, if you took his policies and presented them to people without declaring that they were from Corbyn's manifesto, a huge majority supported those policies. I keep getting off topic, right? Yes, so why did they call the election? It is my belief that the Tory party, well, first of all, they already knew that their support had been crumbling for years. Okay, they messed up Brexit. They obviously tried to get out of doing a real Brexit for 3 years under Theresa May, who tried to create this fake leave arrangement that was widely described as a Brino, Brexit in name only. And Johnson then took over, and the exact same deal. Johnson, who not long before the referendum is on camera saying that he supports a single market. Johnson and Michael Gove, these cartoonish characters that were put in charge of a little circus sideshow leave campaign to throw a bone to the huge majority of Tory voters that have supported Brexit, right? But let's not forget that the Tories' main campaign was for Remain, and when Remain lost, the Tory Prime Minister left. They wanted Remain, but they had to pretend like they had some inclination towards leave because their voters wanted that. So that was the whole Johnson sideshow. It was never meant to win. Brexit was actually, in theory at least, the biggest shot across the bow, the biggest win for democracy and the people in living memory. And it was cast in such a way that the left, progressives, were tricked into believing that supporting the EU was a progressive position. Such short memories. In the 60s and 70s, when Labour was genuinely socialist, they opposed EU membership. It was the Tories that brought us into the EU. It was the Tories that signed Maastricht Treaty in the 90s and further tightened or further centralised that control and further removed the democratic process from what was going on. So in the EU, only the Commission can table bills to be debated, and you can't vote for the Commission. You only vote for MEPs, and they are just a rubber stamp for policies that the Commission get to decide on. So again, it's this obfuscation, this distancing of people from actually what's happening in the democratic process. And as a capitalist organisation, of course, it's certainly not socialist. So that whole flip around occurred, unfortunately. But despite that obfuscation created around that issue, Brexit was voted for. We didn't get a real Brexit. But because of that obfuscation, because the Tories tried so hard and for so long to sort of frustrate that process of leaving and weren't honest about that process, because of that and many other things, the Tories' own voter base had become so impatient with them, so frustrated, so pissed off at their own party, the natural party, that the Tory support was collapsing. And it only raised back up in 2019 again because Tories were the only party capable of and promising to finish off Brexit, right? So to go back one more election, in 2017, Corbyn's huge success, the biggest vote swing since World War II, 12 point something million votes, right? A huge success despite all the shit thrown at him. He almost got into government then. He was around 2,000 votes across several different swing counties. Almost got into power, right? Reduced the Tory government to rubble. 2019, that was reversed because people were desperate for Brexit to happen, and Keir Starmer had managed to back Corbyn into a corner to support in the second referendum. So the Tories artificially regained some support just for that one issue. And of course, at that time as well, Farage's Brexit party made a pact with the Tories to oppose Labour and not the Tories. That was rigged in many different ways. But after that had happened, right, the Tory vote continued to collapse because they presided, of course, through all of the horrible shit that happened during COVID, the lockdowns, the mandates, the masks, the ridiculous policies around all those things, and lots of other things. And of course, the Tories are, just as Keir Starmer is, are beholden to this globalist framework, and the Tory traditional voter base saw this. Support was collapsing. This is the lowest overall voter turnout in living memory. I can't tell you exactly how long, but we're talking decades. Tiny voter turnout. Is like about, is it 50%? It's something like 50% of the electorate didn't vote. So Keir Starmer, with a huge majority of seats, 412 seats, a huge rise of 200 odd seats, with 3 million less votes than Corbyn got for losing in 2017, tells you something about the dissatisfaction or the disillusionment, disenfranchisement in this country. So this isn't really a story of Labour winning. This is a story of the Tories losing. But I think they wanted to lose. To round this video off, I think they wanted to lose. And that you can point to sort of anecdotal pieces of evidence to sort of support this theory. Like Rishi Sunak coming out and announcing the election in the pissing rain, and number 10 couldn't find a gazebo or an umbrella for him or do it indoors. He looked ridiculous. He looked ridiculous standing in the pissing rain announcing an election. And ever since then, there's been several different major gaffes, no real attempt at campaigning. I think they've thrown the election with the help of Farage, who unfortunately a lot of people think is some kind of radical anti-establishment figure. I think he is a plant. I think he's always been a plant. He's a Pied Piper to lead the dissatisfied into a cul-de-sac, to feel like there is another option, that there is hope, that there is a challenge to the system that they're pissed off at, because people are pissed off with the system on both sides of the aisle, left and right. That's the problem, you see. And what actually unites us are the same things that unites these two parties that pretend to be opposed to each other. They have the same agenda, the same overall direction of travel. Small little fringe differences when it comes to social matters, but the general direction of travel towards this globalized fascism, this unaccountable, unelected, anti-democratic, corporate-ruled control of people's lives and the economies and everything else. The huge transfers of wealth from the poor to the rich and all the rest of it. Both those parties are on the same page about that, and those policies affect all of us the same. Everybody's affected by the cost of living crisis, inflation, all the rest of it, lack of opportunities, lack of training, lack of industry. All those things affect the left and the right. So everybody's pissed off for very similar reasons most of the time. Again, with our little clashes on social issues, pretending to make like there's differences between, these are trivial differences in the scheme of things. So the Tory vote was collapsing, and I believe Farage, his goal was to further collapse the Tory vote when they're already going to do really badly. So Reform Party, no doubt, has taken far more votes off of potential Tories voters than they did off Labour. Because of the way that they present themselves, they do have Farage, like all good snake oil salesmen, does say some true things. Usually he's late to the party on them. He wasn't too vocal about the whole scamdemic stuff at the time, but he's come around since, and he's acting like a mouthpiece for those concerns now, when it's become quite obvious that the majority of people have twigged what was going on there. But they wanted the vote to collapse because they don't want to be anywhere near power for the next phase of this uni-party shift towards global fascism. Agenda 2030 is something that they're desperate to enact. Right? These are authoritarian and oppressive policies dressed up as concern for the environment, dressed up as concern for people's health and safety. What has anything that they have ever done indicate to us that they are concerned about the environment or people's health and safety? That is a smokescreen, a facade, an excuse that they are using to tighten the noose on what has been happening, which is a burgeoning awareness of the inequalities of the global system that we currently have. So perhaps as a consequence of the internet, global and speedier communication and awareness of things, easier to organize in theory at least, easier to communicate ideas and spread quicker and all the rest of it. There is a trajectory that they are very, very scared of, and that is people's awareness that we can organize to circumvent the current systems that are destroying the planet and the economies and our lives and our freedoms. So they're quite desperate to lock us down in several different ways. So control of movement, control of people's bodily autonomy, control of employment, control of with surveillance. So all of these systems of control that are ramping up and are being proposed to be even further exaggerated through things like the international health regulations. Sounds nice, doesn't it? International health regulations. If you actually look at what they proposed, especially before the recent apparent climb down, where they removed some of the more egregious policies. I say apparent because that shit's going to come back around again. That's not finished. And they've told us that directly. But but because of backlash, they've had to sort of sweep it under the carpet a little bit for now. But this direction of travel towards more and more control over people and less democratic accountability is something that the Tory party doesn't want to be directly associated with, because if they're going to get close to being able to fulfill Agenda 2030 and read into that again, it's one of these things that is blithely written off as a conspiracy theory by people who can't be asked to look into it, or it hurts their head too much to think too deeply about the world and politics, and it's too much. The world can't be that corrupt, can it? Nah, it's got to be nah. Generally speaking, these huge, powerful organisations more or less have our best interests at heart, don't they? No. If they're going to get towards being able to enact those things, it's going to have to ramp up pretty quickly. You're talking things like CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies. And again, this is to throw around this conspiracy theory label. When you look into it, they are openly talking about their plans to enact digital currencies backed by a social credit system, like they have in China. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't look to China for, inspiration on how to run, inspiration on how to gauge human rights, right? But all of a sudden, since lockdowns, because they were the first to implement lockdowns, remember, all of a sudden the world is thinking, oh yeah, let's just do what China's doing. Yeah. So China has a social credit system to keep their citizens in check by punishing them for stepping out of line, rewarding them for being a good citizen. And it's just another system of control that they're trying to implement. So the Tories don't want to be in power whilst that shit gets ramped up. I mean, they have the same agenda. They've set the groundwork for it. They've already been moving in that direction, and this is why their support is tanked. Well, one of the reasons. But I believe that they absolutely wanted to lose this election, and badly, so that they could sit on the sidelines and pretend to oppose what's going to happen next, or what they're going to try to implement next. I do try and remind myself not to use language that's like definitive, like this will happen, this da da da. They want that to happen. They're planning for these things to happen. It is their intent. We have to oppose what they're doing. They can only do any of it with our consent and cooperation. And a microcosm of that was seen with the COVID situation. If a critical mass of people had refused to wear masks, they wouldn't have been able to have mask mandates. They'd have had to roll back from that and just forget about it, because no one was doing it, and you can't force everybody to do something. You can only force a minority to do it when you've got a majority already complying. So you use the stolen legitimacy of people's compliance to then justify forcing the rest of people to fall in line. If nobody had lined up for the jabs, they wouldn't have been able to talk about mandates. They did pass a mandate bill, and they reversed it at the very last minute, after the majority of people had already been scared enough of losing their job to go and agree to getting it anyway. So technically, people did still get it off their own volition. Technically, they weren't forced. Because if they'd waited, as I did, till the last minute and made arrangements to find other jobs in places that didn't have mandates, they wouldn't have had to have had it. And I know a lot of people that were pissed off, because the only reason they had that jab is because they thought they had to, because they thought they were going to lose their job otherwise. People don't have the gumption to stand up against that kind of situation. You're locked into a system where you need money every month. Most people are living paycheck to paycheck on these lower wages. Lower wages in healthcare, it's not important. It's only looking after the most vulnerable people in society. They don't need a decent wage that they can actually build up some savings and be independent if they need to be for a period of time. No, most people are living paycheck to paycheck, and especially with bills going up all the time, families as well, God forbid. You will do what you need to do to maintain your quality of life as you see it. And most people agreed to those jobs not because they were scared of COVID, because everybody was breaking rules when no one was looking, right? Everybody was desperate to get back out to public events. The vast majority of people were not scared. The vast majority of people didn't get those jobs because they felt they actually needed it. They got it because they were told they had to. And that's just to make the point that none of this shit can be done without our consent and our compliance. So I have to try and remind myself to sort of use this language in a way that says they want to do this horrible authoritarian stuff. We can still stop it by just saying no. No, I'm not doing it. No. If enough people do that, it's over. So yeah, really, 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 I would say mixed feelings about the election, but it's not mixed feelings. I know how I feel about it. I'm still bitter about the whole Corbyn situation because that was a fantastic manifesto and a far more genuine progressive leader of Labour Party. Although I did fall out of love with Corbyn for a couple of reasons. He's not the Messiah. He's not perfect. And I certainly have less respect for him now than I did when he was leader. And I was, passionately supporting his leadership. He didn't say enough about the authoritarian stuff going on during COVID. He supported some of those policies during COVID. He wasn't brave to speak out or investigate the issues that we are concerned with, other mandates, vaccine injury. I don't know, he might have made a couple of vague acknowledgements of some of these issues, but he never campaigned like Andrew Bridgen, ex-Tory independent MP, now lost his seat. He never campaigned. He never attended the vaccine injury debates. He didn't seem interested, right? And that's a huge problem for me because the whole COVID situation needs to not fade into the background now. Now that we have the receipts, now that we can prove just how flawed all of those policies were, how dangerous the vaccines were, how lacking the testing was, how incompetent or rather negligent the pharmaceutical companies were, all the rest of it. But that's again being pushed under the carpet because none of the parties are interested in addressing that, because it's a wormhole that goes pretty fucking deep, because none of that stuff happened in a vacuum. It's all linked to and motivated by this problem of a shift to this globally organized sort of fascistic model of global governance, where corporations hold more sway than electorates. But Corbyn was wrong on a couple of things as well. I mean, he's wrong on the trans stuff, but don't need to go there today. Yeah, we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. Maybe Starmer has been playing the long game and just pretending to be an establishment shill, pretending to be a Labour man, right? So it's like maybe he's just done maybe it's like Inception bullshit going on. Like he's really a good guy, but he pretended to be an arsehole who pretended to be a decent guy in Labour. Maybe. Let's see. Let's see, shall we? One thing is true, a historically huge percentage of the electorate didn't even bother voting. I didn't vote. I would have done had there been a decent independent running. But the only independent in my constituency is ex-UKIP. So there was no progressive, there was no left-wing, there was no radical independents running. Not that they would have had a chance, of course, but that's it. All right, guys, what do you think? What do you think of the UK election results and the whole situation? And next, we've got the US election, where a guy who shits his pants is up against a guy who grabs women's vaginas in public. What a choice. All right, guys, bye.